My name is Ava Sterling, and I was 25 years old the night my parents decided my future belonged to my sister. It happened on Easter Sunday. My family's dining room looked perfect. The white tablecloth was pressed, candles flickered in the center of the table, and my mother kept smiling like she was waiting for a surprise she couldn't wait to reveal. I should have known something was wrong. My parents only acted that cheerful when they wanted something. Across from me sat my older sister, Brooke. She was 32, married for 6 years, and for the last 2 years, she'd been struggling to have a baby. Everyone in the family knew how much it hurt her. I knew too. I had driven her home after failed appointments. I had listened to her cry. I had sat beside her when she felt like giving up. I loved my sister. That's why what happened next hurt so much. Dinner was almost over when my father tapped his glass. The room went quiet. Brooke immediately lowered her eyes, already emotional. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Then she said the words that changed everything. "Ava, your sister needs you." The folder appeared seconds later. Brooke's husband, Nathan, slid it across the table and placed a pen on top. Everyone was smiling. Everyone except me, because nobody had told me there would be paperwork. I looked down at the cover page, Gestational Surrogacy Agreement. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. Then Brooke started crying. "Ava, you're my only chance." The room immediately filled with sympathy. My mother wiped her eyes. My father nodded slowly. Nathan stared at me expectantly. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. This wasn't a conversation. It was a decision they had already made without me. The contract had been printed. The pen was ready. The witnesses were already sitting around the table. All that was missing was my signature. "You want me to be your surrogate?" My voice sounded smaller than I intended. Brooke reached for my hand. "We wouldn't ask if there was any other way." Wouldn't ask. The strange thing was that nobody had actually asked yet. They were already talking as if I had agreed. My mother squeezed my shoulder. "You're young, you're healthy, and you're family." There it was, family. The word my parents used whenever they wanted sacrifice from me. I looked around the table. Every face was waiting. Every face expected the same answer. Yes. I loved Brooke, but something about the entire situation felt wrong. Not the surrogacy itself, the way it was being presented, the pressure, the audience, the contract waiting before anyone had even discussed it with me. I worked as a contract review specialist for a healthcare law firm. Most people found legal documents boring. I read them for a living. And one rule had saved me more than once: never sign anything the same day it's handed to you, especially when people are rushing you. So instead of reaching for the pen, I reached for the contract. The smiles around the table faded slightly. "Ava," Nathan said with a laugh, "it's mostly standard paperwork." That sentence immediately caught my attention. Mostly. Not entirely. Mostly. I opened the first page. The agreement was nearly 30 pages long. No reasonable person could read it properly during Easter dinner, which meant one of two things. Either they expected me to trust them, or they expected me not to read it at all. Neither option made me comfortable. My father cleared his throat. "We've already spoken to attorneys." My mother smiled. "Everything's been taken care of." Again, something felt off. Taken care of for whom? I slowly flipped through the pages: medical sections, appointment requirements, insurance language, legal definitions. Everything looked normal at first glance. Too normal. The kind of normal designed to make people stop paying attention. Then I noticed Nathan watching me. Not Brooke. Nathan. And he looked nervous. That was the moment my instincts started screaming. Because people don't get nervous when a contract is fair. They get nervous when someone actually reads it. I closed the folder. The room immediately tensed. Brooke leaned forward. "So?" I forced a small smile. "I'm taking it home." Silence. Complete silence. My mother blinked. What? I'm reading it first. Nathan's expression changed instantly, only for a second, but I caught it, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Disappointment. Not surprise. Disappointment. As if my decision had ruined part of a plan. Ava, my mother said carefully, there's really no reason to make this complicated. I looked down at the contract, then back at my family, and for the first time all evening, I realized something. Nobody was worried about whether I would become a surrogate. They were worried about whether I would read before deciding, and those are two very different things. I picked up the folder and stood. I'm not saying no. Relief immediately appeared on Brooke's face, but I'm not saying yes tonight either. Nathan's jaw tightened. My father looked frustrated. My mother looked worried. And suddenly I knew. Whatever was hidden inside those pages, they had been counting on me not finding it. What none of them remembered was that reading contracts wasn't just something I did. It was the reason people hired me. And before I signed anything, I was going to read every single word. I took the contract home and put it on my kitchen table. Part of me wanted to believe I was overthinking everything. Brooke was my sister. She wanted a baby, not a fight. Maybe the awkward Easter dinner was just emotion. Maybe. But I had one rule when it came to contracts. Never sign something the same day it's handed to you, especially when people are rushing you. So I sat down with a cup of coffee and started reading. The first several pages looked normal. Definitions, medical requirements, appointment schedules, nothing unusual. Then I reached a section called Financial Responsibility. That's where things changed. One clause stated that pregnancy-related costs, not covered by insurance, could become the responsibility of the surrogate, me. I read it twice to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. Then I kept going. A few pages later, another clause shifted certain financial risks to the surrogate if complications occurred. Again, me. The language wasn't obvious, but the pattern was. The intended parents were being protected. The surrogate was carrying the risk. I grabbed a notepad and started writing down page numbers. Around midnight, I called my friend Chloe, who worked in compliance review. I emailed her the sections that concerned me. 20 minutes later, she called back. Ava, do not sign this. My stomach tightened. That bad? The financial risk is flowing the wrong way. Exactly what I had been thinking. In a fair agreement, most of these costs stay with the intended parents, she said. This document keeps moving them toward you. After we hung up, I returned to the contract. Now I wasn't looking at individual clauses. I was looking for a pattern, and the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Every few pages, another responsibility landed on me. Another protection landed on Brooke and Nathan. One issue might be a mistake. Several issues are a strategy. Then I reached page 16. A clause buried deep in the agreement stopped me cold. I read it once, then again, then a third time, because suddenly I understood why everyone had wanted my signature at Easter. Whatever was hidden in this agreement, they hadn't expected me to take the contract home. And for the first time, I started wondering whether the problem wasn't the surrogacy itself. Maybe the real problem was the contract they wanted me to sign. I barely slept that night. The clause on page 16 kept replaying in my mind. In simple terms, it said that if I withdrew from the process after certain stages began, or if my actions caused what the contract called a material disruption, I could be held financially responsible for resulting losses. The wording was vague, dangerously vague. The more I looked at it, the more one thing became clear. This contract protected Brooke and Nathan, not me. The next afternoon, Brooke called. "So, what do you think?" she asked. I glanced at the contract. "I'm still reviewing it." A long sigh came through the phone. "Ava, I feel like you're looking for reasons to say no." That caught me off guard because I wasn't looking for reasons to say no. I was looking for reasons to say yes safely. Brooke, have you actually read every page? Silence. Then, not every single page. My stomach dropped. The person asking me to sign hadn't even read the entire agreement herself. After we hung up, I kept reviewing my notes. By now, a pattern had emerged. The problem wasn't one bad clause. It was dozens of small decisions that shifted risk away from Brooke and Nathan and onto me. That evening, there was a knock at my door. Nathan. He stood there holding a box of lemon pastries, my favorite. I figured we should talk. I let him in. The moment he sat down, his eyes landed on the printed contract spread across my table, covered in highlights and notes. His expression tightened, just for a second, but I noticed. "You've really gone through all of it," he said. "That's what I do for a living." A short silence followed. Then he smiled awkwardly. "Ava, I think you're making this more complicated than it needs to be." Almost the exact same thing my mother had said. I folded my arms. "Who hired the attorney?" Nathan hesitated, then answered. "I did." "Not Brooke, Nathan. That mattered." I asked another question. "Did Brooke read the entire contract before asking me to sign it?" The pause this time was even longer. Finally, he shook his head. "Not all of it." There it was, the truth. Brooke wasn't the one reviewing the agreement. Nathan was. Brooke wasn't the one negotiating terms. Nathan was. And suddenly the entire situation looked different. Because if Brooke hadn't read the contract, she couldn't have known how much risk had been shifted onto me. Nathan stood a few minutes later. "I just don't want this to become a legal battle." I almost laughed. He was saying that to the one person who had been handed a legal contract. After he left, I sat back down and looked at the highlighted pages again. For the first time, I stopped focusing on my sister and started focusing on Nathan. Because every road seemed to lead back to him. And the more I looked, the more I became convinced of one thing. This was never just Brooke's dream. Someone had carefully designed this agreement. And I was about to find out who had really been making the decisions from the beginning. After my conversation with Nathan, I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. Brooke hadn't read the entire contract. Nathan admitted it himself. That meant the person driving this arrangement wasn't my sister. It was her husband. The next day, I decided to do some research. Nothing dramatic, just public records and business information. Within an hour, I found something interesting. Nathan's construction company had taken on several large loans over the past 2 years. That didn't prove anything. Lots of businesses borrow money, but it explained why he might be so focused on shifting financial risk away from himself. That evening, my mother called. "Ava, why are you making this so difficult?" I sighed. "Mom, did you read the contract?" Silence. Then she answered. "I trust Brooke and Nathan." Not an answer. A dodge. Which told me everything I needed to know. Nobody was reading the contract. They were trusting it. And somehow I was the problem for actually reviewing it. The following day, Brooke asked to meet me at a cafe. The moment I arrived, I could see how exhausted she looked. After a few minutes of small talk, she finally asked, "Are you going to say no?" There was fear in her voice. Real fear. And for a moment, I felt terrible for her. I loved my sister. I wanted her to be happy. But wanting a child didn't make this contract fair. I pulled out my highlighted copy and placed it on the table. Brooke stared at the pages covered in notes. Then I started showing her the clauses that worried me. The financial risks, the penalties, the protections that favored her and Nathan. As she read, her expression slowly changed from confusion to concern. Finally, she looked up. I didn't realize any of this. For the first time, I believed her. Then she said something that made me freeze. "That's not what the first draft looked like." I stared at her. The first draft? The moment the words left my mouth, she realized what she'd revealed. Because suddenly I wasn't thinking about the contract anymore. I was thinking about revisions, changes, different versions, which meant someone had altered the agreement after it was originally written. And if I could find that original draft, I might finally discover who had changed the rules and why. The first draft? The color immediately drained from Brooke's face. For a moment, I thought she might pretend she hadn't said it. Instead, she slowly closed the contract and looked down at the table. Ava. What first draft? A long silence followed. Then she whispered, There was an earlier version. My heart started beating faster. How different was it? Brooke hesitated. Very different. I sat back in my chair. Suddenly, every piece of the puzzle started moving. The liability clauses, the penalties, the financial exposure, the strange wording, the pressure to sign quickly. If there had been another version, then someone had intentionally changed this one, and I already had a pretty good idea who. Do you have it? Brooke nodded. At home. Why didn't you tell me? Her eyes filled with tears. Because I didn't think it mattered. That answer hurt more than I expected. Not because she was being cruel, because she was being honest. She had trusted Nathan, trusted him enough not to ask questions, trusted him enough not to read carefully, trusted him enough to ask me to risk my future based on his word. The next evening, Brooke came to my apartment carrying a large envelope. Neither of us spoke much. She simply handed it to me. Inside were 2 contracts, the original draft and the final version. I spread them across my kitchen table, page by page, side by side, comparing everything. Within 20 minutes, the differences became impossible to ignore. The original agreement wasn't perfect, but it was fair. The intended parents carried most of the risk. Medical expenses were clearly assigned. Liability protections existed for everyone. It looked like something 2 families could honestly discuss. Then I opened the final version, and there it was. The same sections rewritten, expanded, strengthened, shifted. Every major change pointed in one direction, away from Nathan and Brooke, toward me. I felt my stomach tighten, because this wasn't an accident. It wasn't sloppy drafting. It wasn't misunderstanding. Somebody had intentionally moved the burden from one side of the contract to the other. I kept reading. Then I found the revision notes attached to one section. Only 3 words, but they changed everything. Client requested revision. Client. Not attorney, not legal recommendation, client. Someone had asked for those changes, and suddenly I wasn't wondering anymore. I knew exactly who. That night I barely slept, not because I was scared, because I was angry. For weeks my family had acted like I was being difficult, like I was overthinking, like I was making a simple act of love complicated. Meanwhile, someone had been quietly rewriting the agreement behind the scenes. The next morning my phone rang. Grandma. I answered immediately. Ava? Her voice sounded calm, steady, the way it always did. Yes, Grandma. I want everyone at my house Sunday. I frowned. Why? A pause, then, because I'm tired of hearing different versions of the story. My pulse quickened. Grandma rarely got involved in family disputes. When she did, people listened. I want Brooke there. I want Nathan there. I want your parents there. Another pause. And I want you to bring the contract. The contract, not the baby discussion, not the family argument, the contract. For the first time, someone else was focusing on the actual document, not the emotions around it, the document itself. I agreed. After the call ended, I looked down at the 2 versions spread across my table. The original, the final. One fair, one dangerous. and sitting between them was the answer to everything. Sunday wasn't going to be about convincing anyone anymore. It wasn't going to be about guilt, or pressure, or family expectations. It was going to be about facts, because for the first time since Easter, I had proof. Proof that the agreement my family wanted me to sign wasn't the agreement that had originally been created. Proof that somebody had deliberately changed it. And if Nathan thought I was walking into Grandma's house to defend myself, he was about to have a very bad afternoon. Because I wasn't bringing excuses. I was bringing evidence. And once Grandma saw those two contracts side by side, the entire story was going to change. Sunday afternoon felt strangely familiar. The same nervous feeling, the same family gathering, the same contract sitting inside a folder beside me. Except this time, I wasn't walking into a trap. I was walking in with proof. When I arrived at Grandma's house, everyone was already there. My parents sat on one side of the living room. Brooke looked exhausted. Nathan looked annoyed. Not worried. Not yet. Annoyed. Like this meeting was an inconvenience he wanted to get through. Grandma sat in her favorite chair near the window. The moment I walked in, she pointed toward the coffee table. "Put the contracts there." Not contract. Contracts. Plural. Nathan's head immediately turned. His expression changed. Just slightly. But I saw it. He hadn't expected that. I sat down and placed both versions on the table, the original draft and the final version, side by side. Grandma adjusted her glasses, then looked directly at Nathan. "Which one did Ava receive?" Nathan glanced at the documents. "The final version." Grandma nodded. "And who requested the changes?" Silence. Nathan didn't answer. Grandma repeated herself. "Who requested the changes?" Everyone in the room was watching him now. My father, my mother, Brooke, me. For several seconds nobody moved. Then Nathan finally spoke. "I worked with the attorney." Not an answer. A dodge. Grandma noticed too. Her eyes narrowed. "So you requested them." Another silence. Then, "Some of them." That was enough. The room shifted instantly, because now it wasn't speculation anymore. It wasn't Ava being cautious. It wasn't family misunderstanding. Nathan had admitted it himself. He changed the contract. Brooke stared at him. "What do you mean, some of them?" Nathan rubbed his forehead. "Brooke." "No." She sat forward. "What do you mean?" For the first time since Easter, I saw genuine confusion on her face. Not guilt, not pressure, confusion. Because she clearly hadn't known how much had been altered. Grandma slowly opened the original draft, then the final version, then the original again. For nearly 10 minutes, she compared pages. Nobody interrupted. Nobody dared. Finally, she stopped and looked directly at Nathan. "Why does this version move the financial responsibility to Ava?" Nathan opened his mouth, then closed it. The room was silent, because there was no good answer. None. If the arrangement was fair, the responsibility wouldn't need to move. If the arrangement was loving, the protection wouldn't need to disappear. Grandma already understood that. So did everyone else. Then she asked the question that ended everything. "Nathan." Her voice was calm, very calm. "If Ava were your daughter, would you let her sign this?" The room froze. I watched his face, watched him search for an answer, any answer, but there wasn't one, because the truth was obvious. No, he wouldn't. No decent parent would. No decent brother would. No decent husband would. And everyone in that room knew it. Nathan finally looked down. That silence was all the answer anyone needed. Brooke started crying. My father removed his glasses. My mother stared at the floor. And Grandma slowly closed the contract. Then she said the words that changed everything. "Ava owes nobody her body." Nobody spoke. Nobody argued, because there was nothing left to argue. The evidence was sitting on the table. The revisions were sitting on the table. The truth was sitting on the table. Grandma turned toward Brooke. "You may want a child." Then toward Nathan. "You may be afraid." Then toward my parents. "And you may believe family should help." She paused. "But none of that gives you the right to pressure someone into signing away their future." The room remained completely silent. Then Grandma did something none of us expected. She picked up the final contract, tore it directly down the middle. The sound echoed through the room. Page after page followed. Rip, rip, rip. 30 pages reduced to scraps. Nobody stopped her. Nobody even tried. When she finished, she dropped the pieces into the fireplace basket beside her chair. Then she looked directly at me. "Ava." I met her eyes. "You never needed anyone's permission to say no." For a second I couldn't speak, because that was the thing nobody had said this entire time. Everyone talked about duty, responsibility, family, sacrifice, but nobody had talked about choice. Not until now. A month later, life looked very different. The surrogacy discussion was over. Completely. Brooke eventually apologized. A real apology. Not for wanting a child. For asking me to carry risks she hadn't bothered to understand herself. Nathan never really apologized. Not properly. But it didn't matter anymore. Because the contract was gone. The pressure was gone. And the illusion was gone. The biggest thing I lost wasn't the agreement. It was the belief that people who love you will automatically protect you. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they get scared. Sometimes they get desperate. Sometimes they convince themselves your sacrifice is reasonable because it benefits them. But the most important thing I learned from that Easter was simple. Love does not require a signature. And if someone needs you to stop reading before you agree, the answer is probably no. That was the day my family learned I wouldn't be guilted into becoming my sister's surrogate. And all it took to end everything was one clause they never thought I'd read.